All right, well, today I have the special privilege of being joined by CBS Sports and correspondent for CBS News, mentor of mine, Mr. James Brown. I call him JB, but JB, thank you for joining me today. Appreciate you using some time out your schedule to talk Vikings today.
Well, as I shared with you at the very top, I'm always a little skittish whenever I'm joining somebody as handsome and as sharp as you are. So take it easy on the elder, okay?
Well, I mean, I guess the elder spokesman has a lot to say about this new regime here in Minnesota. You got Kwesi Adofo-Mensah as the GM. You got Kevin O'Connell as the new head coach. What's your thoughts after talking to them and after listening to some of the things they had to say?
Hey, Gabe, first of all, I thank you so very much for establishing that up front, because one of the things I've tried to do in all of my years in the business, and clearly I have had to do that in terms of my role as a news correspondent as well, is to make sure that I've done my homework in talking with the people who are the leaders of the organization, the owners. Clearly, that goes without saying. And I've been very, very impressed with the leadership skills and capabilities, both those demonstrated and those that will now come to the forefront even more so, given the responsibilities that they have there with the Vikings and what they're looking to do to make this team more than just a contender, but to be serious in that regard. Those are things that will happen on the field, but none of that happens on the field. I'm a firm believer, again, drawing on my corporate experience with both Xerox and Eastman Kodak and in sales and sales management. Nothing happens unless that template, the game plan, if you will, in sports vernacular, is solid and in place with all of the corresponding parts moving in and being on the same team, headed in the same direction. I'm excited. Mm-hmm. Look, Kwesi Mensah is a brilliant young man who is up to the challenge. We've seen what he's done in terms of cutting the teeth, if you will, with Cleveland, and I'm sure before that. I did have a chance to have a brief conversation with Coach O'Connell. Look, I could play for him. Energetic, enthusiastic. He wants to make certain, while he's the boss, I get that, he wants to make certain that it's an all-in mentality, that everybody's in the boat rowing in the same direction. All those are very nice sounding things, but how you execute that is so important. And I think these two guys clearly have the requisite skills and experiences to get that done.
How do you think those skills and that experience will energize this team that is right on the cusp of getting over that hump?
While I would certainly, again, defer to them from how you get that done on the field, the type of strategy that you have in place, the tactics to execute that strategy, finding the key components in terms of players, resources to make that happen on the field. Look, they have been engrossed in all of the analysis necessary to see what's missing to be competitive, first of all, in that division, and then beyond that. However, in terms of establishing the culture, the one thing that became abundantly clear to me from the outside looking in, and Gabe, my experience has been more by way of being humbled and blessed to be a part of several of the team's chapel services. An awful lot comes out in those sessions in terms of a player's needs. It's just like a manager, an executive getting some quality time with one of their employees and hearing things outside of the work conversation that tells them something about the people, and if the relationship is good enough, that they can share about what is missing. I referenced the old expression, however trite it is, Gabe, that nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care. And if employee is excited about coming to work, and by the way, that was something that Kevin O'Connell mentioned, coming into the building, being excited about it because they've got an environment and a culture where people care about them, hearing what they have to say. Clearly, leadership, Mr. Mensah and Coach O'Connell, have to be the driving forces. But if the players know that they genuinely care and it's all about making sure that they, the players, maximize the potential that they bring to the table and that they care about them, you know what? Players will show that. Look at the difference between Odell Beckham Jr. playing on the teams that he did before he got to Los Angeles. Sean McVay obviously had the right mix in place, and clearly with some key components on the field in terms of players who also poured into that as well.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of people pouring into people, you've been able to pour into some of these athletes, some of these teams. People have been able to pour into you. Just speaking of the people that's been able to be a part of that team, what makes up a good team? You've been around the Tony Dungys of the world, the Bill Cowhers. We see you every Sunday on CBS Sports, pregame, halftime, postgame show. So what are some things that you have learned and that you have seen that makes a good team?
One of the age-old things that never changes, and you can go to any sport and point to a or two or three players. In the case of football, you've got, yes, offense, defense, and special teams. So if you've got people, what never changes is your best player has to be your hardest worker. Your best player needs to model the professionalism that others will want to emulate. That's a given. Let me reference basketball, which was my sport some 80 pounds and 200 years ago. And having played it, drafted by the Atlanta Hawks, cut by the Hawks, but very good friends with then Pete Maravich, God bless him. Pete was a phenomenal player. He also was the hardest working player on that team. I mentioned Red Auerbach. He's had some phenomenal Hall of Famers. Larry Bird, of more recent vintage, was the best player on that team, also was the hardest worker. I go back to the other key components, the Sam Jones of the world, the Casey Jones of the world. You name them, all of those players maximize what they brought in the way of value to the team. So anybody coming in and seeing, okay, this is the culture. You look at the New England Patriots of recent vintage. Bill Belichick always says, just do your job. And if you come into an environment and you're seeing that, that's what's most important. But it is also important because you know what? Coach Dungy, I remember him saying when he took over both the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and turned that team around and how well they were playing, he did the same thing with the Indianapolis Colts, that he wanted to respect them and get the best out of those guys because he was going to be there behind them. He was not going to get up in their face and curse them and treat them like animals. He was going to treat them with respect to get the best out of them. And there's no question that his career showed that was the best elixir.
JB, you got me going down memory lane, just thinking of just great names. You talked about Pete Maravich. You talked about basketball side of the ball, Pete Maravich, Red Auerbach. But moving back to the football side of the ball, I know you've been a part of the game for a while. What are some of the biggest changes that you have seen? Of course, the thing to come to mind, pass interference or how that rule has changed. But since you have been covering the NFL, which has been over a few decades now, what are some of the big changes that have stood out to you?
It is abundantly clear that things have been changed decisively to favor the offense. It is absolutely a quarterback-driven league. Look, I think some of the absolute best athletes on the team are on the defensive side of the ball. So I do feel for them because, again, everything is about making sure it's a good fan experience. People want to see scoring. There is no doubt. And you mentioned the 3 decades. I've been at this for about 35 years in terms of covering the league. And this has been after the wild card weekend, I can't remember any postseason being more exciting, close, driven, even in terms of how the league has gone about designing things so that there is design parity in the league. A team one year that is very challenged with talent and not having done well, i.e. the Cincinnati Bengals. Look how quickly things can be turned around to keep that fan base focused. So that's pretty much what the biggest change has been. But look, I think about the great ball players that are, historic figures with the Minnesota Vikings franchise. And I'm reminded that Kwesi Adofo-Mensah had a meeting recently with the Hall of Famers, and a number of teams do that. But the fact that, as I'm hearing and being told, that it happened so quickly into his tenure and that he was genuine in saying, let me sit back and just listen. You guys share with me. You have brought talent to the table, and certainly some history to this organization. What are we missing? And, the overwhelming part of the conversation was all about having a culture that is one, where people are truly going at this together. There's not a hierarchy and being dictatorial to, say, the players, the proletariat, if you will. And that's what you were hearing from people like Carl Eller, from Jared Allen, from Steve Jordan, from Greg Coleman, from Alan Page, and on. Robert, you've been hearing that throughout. And I found it very interesting, and let me be clear about this, because I've learned this from Tony Dungy as well, certainly which he did in both of his stops. A few of those players made it clear. One of the things that absolutely should be addressed about the organization is having the likes of some most valuable players who you wouldn't even think of, Tom and Jeannie Lamphere.
Oh, wow.
Because players felt that they helped to round out some needs that they have as men, challenges that they can talk with the team chaplains, husband and wife team, because the wives and or girlfriends certainly need to be factored into the equation because they are there. I've had personal experience with Tom Lamphere and Jeannie Lamphere. Tony Dungy makes it clear when he thought that he was going to get his first NFL job many years before he finally got the opportunity, and it didn't happen because the owner of this particular team thought that Tony, wouldn't be able to motivate his players right without getting up in their faces and berating them or engage them in profanity-laced tirades. What Tony and Tom Lamphere did was to spend 2 years learning what leadership skills were all about. And perhaps the bedrock literature, if you will, that they were reading was in the book of Nehemiah. So when Coach Dungy finally got to the league, the rest is history. Peyton Manning will tell you that. Warren Sapp will tell you that. Derek Brooks will tell you that. John Lynch, and on and on and on. So that was what was important, that the players from the Vikings, from their past, great players, said, you know what, the culture needs to be improved and more solid. And Tom and Jeannie Lamphere played a significant role in that. I know them personally, and you won't find any more significant and substantive people than those. So that was one of the main areas that they talked about as well.
Well, JB, hopefully we can get that here, get that culture back to where it's supposed to be, and hopefully be holding that Lombardi Trophy here in the near future. I appreciate your time today.
Oh, wow, you let me off easy, so no other real tough questions for me? You can pull some out of the hat, or if you want to save them for next time. But look, let me just say, I'm excited about the new leadership there. I think it speaks volumes about the leadership there, the Wolves, in terms of what they've done. So the Wolves clearly have a pretty good business eye from that, and I'm excited about what Mr. Mensah is going to be bringing to the table, and Coach O'Connell as well, and get them back. Look, your squad, you know it better than me. Vikings fans know it better than me. 14 one-score games that they lost this past season. Let's see if this improved culture and environment can take them over the ledge to the next level, up higher on the ledge, because the potential certainly is there with a few other key moves that people who know more about football than me will be able to make with the team. For sure. Well, JB, we got free agency, then we got the draft afterwards. So we'll be connecting with you once the pieces start to come in place. I appreciate it so much. Sounds good. Gabe, thank you so very much. Have a great weekend coming up, buddy.
Likewise, you too.